I remember exactly the day it began, not by the wall clock in the ICU or the hiss of machines keeping time, but by the sound of air easing into my mother's chest, like her body was still arguing with the idea of leaving. The room smelled like alcohol swabs and goodbyes. The ceiling threw down a cold, hard light, and I held her hand, trying to believe this was still life and not just hospital routine. A little after 2 a.m., my daughter texted, "Don't worry about her." That was it. No emoji, no context. I read it over and over until the words thinned out and stopped meaning anything. Don't worry about who? My mother? My wife? About my daughter herself? I was too tired to decode it. For a second, I chose to believe she had it handled, that I could finally shut my eyes and rest. But there's a kind of rest the body takes and the soul rejects. Even as I dozed off in the chair, something in me stayed on guard, as if it already knew what was coming. Wasn't loss. It was revelation. You know that feeling when life asks you to look back and notice where you stopped listening to the people you love? I understood later. That hospital room wasn't only the end of one life, it was the quiet collapse of another. Mine. While my mother's breathing grew heavy and thin, my mind drifted home, to my wife, my daughter, and a strange weight pressed on me, like the math of our absences didn't add up. Why was it easier to sit among tubes and monitors than to face whatever waited in my own house? Love bends when time leans on it. We call fear care. We call guilt protection. We think we're saving someone when we're just delaying the truth. Near dawn, my mother murmured something I couldn't catch. An old line, maybe from a dream. I leaned in and thought I heard, "You're going to wake up too late." I smiled, told myself it was the haze, and fell asleep with my cheek on the bed rail, my phone still glowing in my palm, my daughter's message pulsing on the screen. By morning, time had changed its face. My mother didn't open her eyes, and back home, something, or someone, had closed too. If stories like this make you think, hit subscribe. It's how we keep finding each other here. When I walked out of the hospital, the sun felt the wrong shade, like the whole town floating in a glass of cloudy water. In the parking lot, my steps sounded like I was crossing a field of invisible glass. I started the car and let the radio try to hand me a sentence that fit my ache. Nothing. Traffic updates. Chance of rain. Rain? As if the sky had the nerve to add even that. The drive home was long and short at once, long at red lights that refused to change, short in the way memories stampede. Smells, voices, scenes so old they barely belong to anyone now. I believed home would meet me like it always did, tired but faithful. The house breathing slow, things where they belonged. Maybe my daughter at the stove making coffee, my wife finally asleep after another silent night of handling what makes work without making news. I believed my daughter's text was a grown-up move. "I've got this, Dad. Your shoulders are full." I believed it the way you believe in one last breath before a long dive, not because it's true, but because you need it to be. The gate sang its high, rusty note only I could hear. The entryway smelled like damp soil, though there hadn't been rain. Inside, the clock ticked louder than I remembered, like time itself was teasing me. "See? I move on. You're the one slipping." The table was half set, a coffee mug with a cold ring at the bottom, a bitten piece of toast, a napkin crushed into the shape of a spent tissue. The scene asked for meaning. I hunted for it and found only shadows. I called for my daughter. Nothing. I called for my wife. My voice caught between guilt and urgency. Silence answered. I moved slow, out of respect for whatever I didn't know yet. The basement door was shut in a different way. Not just pulled to, metal with the chill of a decision. The knob wouldn't turn. A current climbed my spine and settled at my forehead like a sweat with no heat. I knocked gently. No answer. Knocked again. Harder. A chair scraped. A body shifted. "Honey?" I said, shocked at how small my voice sounded. "It's me." Her voice came from a distance that wasn't the basement's, older than that. "I'm okay." I wanted to believe it. I always wanted the path that asked for less breaking. "Please open up," I said. "I can't," she said. "You locked it," I asked, afraid to ask what I meant. I did. "Why?" Silence. My question hit wood and came back changed. Why now? Why this way? Why never before? My daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand like a passport. Her face was too calm. Dad, I told you not to worry about her. The sentence tried to wear its midnight comfort again, but down here, it had a new voice. Not worry about who? I almost shouted. Your grandmother. Your mom? You? Which her? She came down 2 steps, stopped, measured the room. Mom, she said. The floor gave 0.5 millimeter, the way old houses shift when humidity rises. She's fine, my daughter said. She just needs to stay in there a while. I looked at the door. In there where? Locked? Safe, she corrected. It's different. That was the first time I felt how words can dress up bars. Safe sounds tender, almost maternal. Locked sounds violent. Shame rinsed me. No name for it. A blend of failure, fear, and the urge to protect both sides of a story I didn't yet know. What happened? I asked, quieter now. My daughter looked at me and the room shrank, like the walls leaned in to listen. She was having a moment, she said. I helped her calm down. I wanted to ask which moment. I didn't. The clock told me it was past 11. The morning had slipped, and time mocked me again. There were hairline cracks in our daily life, places where drafts of misunderstanding blew through. My mother's illness had widened them. I left more. My wife picked up spaces we used to share. My daughter, adult by talent and necessity, started making decisions. I called that love, each of us carrying what we could. But love without words builds mazes. And there I was, in the center of one I had let grow. Please open up, I said to my wife again. On the other side, a short breath, like someone tugging a cry back down. I'm okay, she said. But the okay had a chip in it, like a cracked glass that still holds water. How long will you stay in there? I asked, and the shape of the question betrayed me. I was already accepting it. I was negotiating with the absurd. My daughter answered first. Until it passes. Until what passes? I said, late to my own courage. What always passes, she said, and smiled. A quick, nervous smile, like tossing a key in the air and pretending it won't come down. I tried organizing the past to understand the present. My mother, still lucid, watching my wife with an old caution, recognizing a pain she once carried. Half conversations in the kitchen, silverware clinking louder when we bumped a tender subject. My daughter, even as a kid, looking for my eyes to steady hers. I had always tried to be the bridge between 2 banks that never wanted the same bridge. Sometimes, to avoid choosing, you abandon a little of each side. I had abandoned. I pressed my forehead to the wood. It was cool, smelled like old varnish and dust. I remembered installing that door one November. My wife laughing because the screw kept slipping. My daughter bringing water, calling the basement the house's heart, saying we should turn it into a studio one day. I laughed to myself, angry at myself, for imagining details from another season could grant me authority over this one. Memory is sometimes a polite way to refuse what's obvious. Sweetheart, I told my daughter, you can't lock your mother in. She bit her lip and recited like she'd practiced. I didn't lock her in. She wanted it. I helped. My question had been too small. It wasn't only whether the door was locked. It was how we got to a place where that could make sense. What did I miss? What did I pretend not to see? What did I call love when it was fear? Protection when it was control? Tick, tock, tick, tock. The room turned into a metronome for my hesitation. I went to the kitchen to boil water. Any gesture that looked like care. The gas igniter's click sounded like a little thunder. Out the window, our plants leaned as if they were eavesdropping. I came back with tea, no one claimed. Back to the door. I'm here, I said. No rush, just talk to me. Quiet settled. Then a sentence so soft I'm not sure it happened. Thank you for waiting. It broke me in a gentle way. I had forgotten the power of waiting with. My daughter patrolled the house like a border guard. Sometimes she stood in the doorway and looked at me, trying to convince me everything was under control. I was torn between correcting her and fearing I'd crack something she believed she was mending. Mothering layered itself in the air. My mother's, my wife's. Care, wound, inheritance. And me in the middle, heir to a way of loving that never learned to name its shadows. I called the hospital doctor, then hung up. Googled how to handle a crisis, then felt stupid. Tried to pray, and the prayer sounded like a letter with no address. I wanted a fix that didn't ask for courage, a manual, a phrase, a reset button. Love has no manual. Pain has no button. The longer I waited for a miracle to arrive from outside, the clearer it was the only way out ran through rooms inside me I'd avoided for years. "Remember the first time we danced in the living room?" I asked through the door. She took her time. "I do." "The song was terrible," I said, and I could hear her smile. "You stepped on my foot," she said, laughing, and it stung sweet. I sensed her slide down on the other side, back to the door. I did the same. Two backs, separated by wood and guilt. I almost said, "I'm sorry," almost. And almost is a small, fatal cliff. My daughter brought me a sandwich, as if to remind our bodies we were alive. "Dad, it was the best thing, trust me." I looked at her and finally saw a child inside a grown body, so much like me, using certainty as a shield against feeling. "What are you afraid of?" I asked. Her eyes dropped, like I'd opened the wrong door. "Of you choosing her," she said. The sentence thrummed between us. "And of losing you." I swallowed. When my mother got sick, I moved to a place where being a son took up the whole map. My wife became a corner. My daughter, a crossroads. I didn't choose. I abandoned. And abandonment is a choice that pretends it isn't. I breathed and counted to 12, the way my mother did before saying something that could cut. "I'm not choosing anyone against anyone," I said. "If we don't learn to care without locking, we're not caring." My daughter's fingers tightened. "What if caring hurts?" "It hurts anyway," I said. I wanted to hold her, but she stepped back, climbed the stairs, and vanished down the hall, leaving a thread of perfume that made me ache for the day she was born. I stopped at the base of the stairs, knowing some steps she'd have to take alone. I stayed by the door, listening to my wife's breath turn into a low surf. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes not. In one of those silences, I thought about what I tried to hide from myself and from everyone. The fear of not being enough, the resentment of not having said stay when things began to slip, the anger at a world that teaches men to fix everything and swallow their own tears, the guilt of asking my wife to understand my absence as if understanding were shelter, and the shame of realizing my daughter learned from me the trick of calling control by the name of care. Afternoon tilted, the light taking on that color that exists between yellow and gray. I stayed on the floor back to the door. I thought about sleeping there the way I'd slept in my mother's room. The body repeats rituals when the soul doesn't know what to do. The living room clock carved a long minute, and from the basement came a delicate sound. Paper. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," she said with an audible smile. "Found a photo." I wanted to ask which, but chose to wait until she wanted to show me. Love is also that. Respecting the order in which someone can hand you their memories. The phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Formalities. Signatures, times. I got up carefully, said I'd come later, and sat back down. My knee popped, and I thought about how the body complains when you finally commit to staying. "I'm here," I said, one last time that day. "I know," she said. And a very old lock, not the metal one, gave a fraction of an inch. Night leaned against the house, the stairs creaked and my daughter appeared again. Tired face, red eyes. "Dad," she began, then stopped. She sat beside me, and the three of us aligned ourselves with a door. I closed my eyes and saw my mother watching us with the patience of someone who learned certain knots don't come loose with force but with time. I opened my eyes and felt time watching back, tapping out the beat of what would come. I didn't yet know how large the misunderstanding was that brought us here. I didn't know what my daughter had seen, heard, imagined. I didn't know what my wife was carrying to keep from hurting us, and how that care had nearly hurt her from the inside. But that night, I understood the question chasing me wouldn't be, how was she locked in? It would be, why do we feel safer with doors than with words? We stayed like that for hours, between breaths and silences, until somewhere between tired and brave, I heard a key turn. Not the metal one. The other one. Before I could tell if it happened out loud or only inside me, my daughter's sentence, same as at 2 a.m., returned with weight. "Don't worry about her." I wanted to answer, I worry about us. I didn't. Sometimes you have to let the whole question form so the answer doesn't come out crooked. In that almost, on that stretched wire, I understood. The truth was inside that room, but our story began long before any door. Tomorrow, I would face it. Tomorrow, I would ask not how, but why. Tomorrow, I would learn that inheritances go by many names, and some look too much like love. By the next morning, the house seemed to breathe on its own. The living room clock kept up its precision, and I asked myself how long it had been since I'd really listened to silence. The basement door was still closed, but now it looked less like a barrier and more like a mirror. I made coffee and set 2 mugs, one for me, one for her, a tiny ceremony. The sound of the pour pulled up an old memory. The first cup my wife made me in that small place with drafty windows and promises. She'd say, "Don't let it boil. Boiled coffee goes bitter." That morning I realized how much of our life had boiled without our noticing. Have you felt that? Love, when you don't tend it in time, evaporates like a pot left on the burner. I sat and watched the 2 mugs as if they could talk. The smell took me to a far Sunday, my daughter small, bare feet on cold tile, her laugh ricocheting while she begged to flip pancakes. My wife watched from the doorway with a look that mixed tenderness and the fear that time runs too fast. I promised to be present and kept half of it. Doesn't it feel sometimes like fate makes you relive the same hurt just to see if this time you'll understand? In the afternoon, my daughter came down slow. Her face was lighter, but her eyes still held something I couldn't name. She sat, warmed her hands on the mug, and said, "She's asleep." I wanted to believe. "Remember Grandma saying some truths wait until your body's ready to hear them?" She nodded, and in that nod I saw the inheritance that hurt me most, treating silence like protection. I looked at the door and remembered my last real talk with my mother before the hospital. "Your daughter watches you more than she listens to you," she'd said, with the serenity only a long life earns. Pretty then. Warning now. Have you noticed how often we call it care when it's just fear of losing control? Night hung like a veil. The house shrank. Every sound meant something. Floorboards, window wind, the woods' quiet arguments. Maybe it started when my mother got sick. Maybe before. Maybe the day I stopped saying I love you and started saying take care. "Why did you tell me not to worry about her?" I asked. My daughter held a truth too big for her hands. "Because I didn't think you could handle another woman hurting near you." The words cleaved me. For the first time I saw the basement wasn't only a place, it was the mirror of everything we'd refused to feel. And there, facing a door still shut, something in me, pride, denial, finally began to open. The metal key didn't budge, but something inside me turned. An old latch giving way without a sound. Afternoon went faint, and a thin ribbon of light slipped under the door, lighting the dust like tired confetti. I sat again, back to the cool wood, and noticed a presence I didn't recognize. Mine. The basement quiet wasn't empty, it was cotton, soaking up footsteps, breath, my clumsy reach for words like a hand searching for a switch in the dark. "Honey," I said, voice soft, edges worn down. Something scraped the floor. Then a small snap, not a lock, a photograph. Old paper has its own blade in the air. "I found a box," she said. "Your mom's." Upstairs, the clock kept sawing time. Each second became a rung. She wrote something. The question outran judgment. "She did," she said, and the silence that followed felt like a tear that held. Then she read, careful as picking up broken glass. "Don't repeat my home." 3 words that accused no one, just opened a window. A draft came through. Damp wood, long-stored clothes, yesterday's coffee. My mother, a woman of few words, spoke from beyond reach. Everything rushed near enough to hurt. My grandmother locking doors to calm things, my mother plastering quiet with recipes, me going to the hospital because loving the sick was easier than loving the well who were near and asking. "I'm the one who locked it," my wife said at last. "You knew, but now I can say it without hiding. I asked our daughter to turn the key because if it were just me, I'd open it. I open to everything. I absorb everything. And today, I needed a border. No anger in her voice. That hurt more than any shout. The absence of anger is a desert. No wind, no map. The light cooled toward blue. My palm on the wood felt the faint vibration of her words, like hearing a heart through a chest, without noise. Have you ever watched a memory change color, and with it, watched yourself change? It wasn't against you, she went on. It was against the way I learned to disappear when you're caught between two pains. When you slept at the hospital, I saw myself in the picture your mother left you, and I stepped aside, like always. The door taught me to stay, not to fix, to wait for my body to catch up to my understanding. The roof creaked, timber settling. I wanted to say I never asked her to vanish. The sentence died. I had asked, without words, with choices, with the way my care wrote a script where I held all the lines. You know when pain doesn't scream but rearranges the furniture, and you realize that room will never be the same? And our daughter? I asked, low, as if volume could break something newly glued. She wanted to save me from you asking me to be strong again, she said, a rough tenderness echoing through the crack. She inherited the jolt of losing you to any woman in pain. And I inherited a dangerous skill, looking whole while in pieces. I closed my eyes. The basement turned into a mirror of 3 generations, holding the same fear with different names. My mother looked at me from dust and light, and I understood. Don't repeat my home. Don't mistake a lock for a cradle. Don't confuse self-erasure with love. A distant dog barked. The fridge hummed. The clock found a new rhythm, intimate as a pulse. I rested my forehead on the wood and whispered, I'm here. No script. The air moved like a curtain sighing. Then, unhurried, metal touched metal. Not a key turning so much as a decision changing its sound. The knob didn't give. Not yet. But the light widened, and in the dust, little particles danced. Small, stubborn, alive. Absence and reunion, maybe the same thing from opposite ends. Loss and meaning, 2 names for the same room when you move the furniture. Pain and release, the knot loosening because someone finally stopped pulling. The house grew still in a way that felt like a pact, not a threat. I breathed, slow, and realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to fix. I wanted to hold. The silence set itself between us like a table. I sat at it, not hungry, present. That night, I sat on the living room floor in the dark, lit only by pale streetlight slipping through the blinds. The whole house exhaled a good kind of tired, the kind that arrives when you stop arguing with what already is. The air smelled like wood and cooling coffee, as if time had decided to sit with me. No more locked doors, no urgent questions, just a new quiet, softer, almost protective. My wife came up the stairs. As she passed, she touched my shoulder, and that small touch carried more truth than 100 long conversations. Forgiveness arrived without adjectives, not as an embrace, but like a breeze after years of shut windows. We sat. It was enough. Love had shifted key. Less shine, more root. Have you felt it? That strange calm after an earthquake? When nothing's where it should be but your heart knows it survived? In the morning, Sun walked into the room without knocking. My daughter slept on the couch, hair wild like it had wrestled wind. I looked at her and finally saw what had always been there. The clumsy, fierce attempt to protect us from a danger she couldn't name. She had taken my silences and forged them into shields. And I, who spent a lifetime trying to save the women in my family, realized that's the very thing they wanted freedom from, being saved. I went to the basement. The door stood open. The air felt lighter. The box my mother kept sat empty. No more notes, just the echo of a sentence living inside me. Don't repeat my home. I sat on the step, closed my eyes, and for the first time thanked what hurt. Pain taught me to listen. Quiet taught me to stay. You know that moment when you realize you don't have to defeat pain? You can let it harden into floor? I let it. My wife came behind me with a mug. I smiled. The smell reached back to our first apartment, to promises we made without knowing promises also age. She sat beside me, and we watched sunlight catch floating dust, sketching invisible roads. Neither of us said we're okay. Maybe because, finally, we were, even if nothing was perfect. And that's when I realized maybe the end had never been the end. The next morning, the house breathed easy. Light came through the windows in straight lines, lifting the dust until each fleck looked like a memory in motion. I walked the hall slowly and noticed how new my own footsteps sounded. No rush, no guilt. Presence. What had been tension now felt like continuity, as if the house had learned another language and was teaching me, word by word, how to stay. I ran my hand over the basement door. The wood still carried the mark of the days it was a border, but the fear was gone. It was just a door. Maybe that's what time does, turns prisons into passages. I closed it gently, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was grateful for it. Have you noticed that when the noise inside you quiets, even the air gets lighter? I made coffee. The same ritual, different intention. Not to wake the body, but the soul. The smell drifted through the rooms and ferried me back to the night I thought I was losing everything, not knowing it was the start of a return. Time has a strange way of giving back what we thought was gone. My wife appeared in the doorway, hair still damp, smiling with the ease of someone who doesn't have to pretend strength anymore. Behind her, my daughter with a mug in her hands, looking at me like she finally understood what love asks for. Space, not control. That small moment, 3 generations of silences and forgiveness, felt more sacred than any prayer. You know when life rearranges itself without noise because someone decided to remain? That was it. No speeches, no promises, just the act of staying. As the coffee cooled, I opened the window. Outside, the world was the same. Cars, neighbors, a bird cutting the sky. But inside, something had softened into clarity. Loving isn't stopping someone from leaving. It's being there when they choose to return. In the end, I realized what we call pain might be the body trying to remember where it came from. Scars aren't the opposite of beauty. They're its truest translation. And life, with all its losses and returns, is an invitation to keep learning how to love, even when love changes shape. I looked up at my mother's photograph on the wall. Morning light touched the glass and blended her reflection into mine. For a breath, I understood. We don't repeat the houses that hurt us when we find the courage to live in them again, differently. If this story reminded you of someone or of a part of yourself you left behind, share it in the comments. Sometimes telling it is what heals.